Heading into week 16 of the fantasy football season, here's a few tight ends I would start this week here. And right now, none of these guys are on the COVID list or injured. So the first guy, Rob Gronkowski of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Rob Gronkowski here might be the number one target in this ball game, depending if Mike Evans plays or not. We know, obviously, Chris Godwin's out. We know Leonard Fournette's out. And Antonio Brown should be returning this week. So Rob Gronkowski this season, the games he's played, he's been a monster for the most part, except last week versus New Orleans. He had a few drops in that game and it was an off game. So week 13 at Atlanta, 4 catches, 58 yards, 2 touchdowns. Week 14 versus Buffalo, 5 catches, 62 yards. And week 15 versus New Orleans, it was just an off game altogether and with the injuries, but he got peppered with 11 targets in that one and 2 catches, 29 yards. So this week here, pretty decent matchup at Carolina. That gives up the ninth least amount of fantasy points to tight ends on the season. But like I mentioned, Gronk's going to get peppered with targets. They're on demand over there in Tampa Bay. They even went out and signed Le'Veon Bell, which I made a video about. So go check that out if you haven't seen it or want to hear my thoughts on it. But anyway, in this one, I think Gronk bounces back and has a big game just on volume and targets alone. And let's be real, he's still one of the best tight ends in fantasy football. The next tight end is Dalton Schultz of the Dallas Cowboys. So this Cowboy passing game, it just hasn't looked right over the last 5 or 6 weeks here, in my opinion. But Dalton Schultz, for the most part, he's been pretty consistent for fantasy owners, except that one hiccup in Week 14 at Washington. So the last few weeks here for Schultz, Week 13 in New Orleans, 5 catches, 43 yards. Week 14 at Washington, a catch, 4 yards. And Week 15 at the Giants, 8 catches, 67 yards. And a touchdown. So another matchup here versus the Washington football team where he didn't have a great game, obviously. But Dalton Schultz is a Dak Prescott favorite. He's a security blanket. And this is a guy that goes out there. He could run the routes. He can make the plays. He could block. And this week here on Sunday Night Football versus the Washington football team, I think he bounces back. And Dak Prescott, he's been a better quarterback at home than he has on the road. So I think this passing game gets back into tack a little over there in Dallas. And I think Dalton Schultz has another good game this week. The next tight end I would start Dallas Goedert of the Philadelphia Eagles. So Dallas Goedert, he's been a solid tight end this season, especially ever since they traded Zach Ertz early in the year to the Arizona Cardinals. So the last few games here for Goedert, 12 at the Giants, 1 catch. Week 13 at the Jets, 6 catches, 105 yards, 2 touchdowns. And then Week 15 versus Washington, a monster game, 7 catches, 135 yards. He dropped 2 balls in that one, including one that bounced off his heel for an interception. Because if he caught that one, he would have had a big gain. So right here, he's the main target, no doubt about it, for Jalen Hurts. And this week here, I think this Eagle team, they were embarrassed in that Week 12 loss at the Giants. They want to bounce back and play a good ball game. And the Eagles are at home as well. So right here, good matchup for Goddard. Giants give up the 14th most fantasy points to tight ends. And Dalton Schultz, a guy who I mentioned in this video, had the big game versus the Giants last week, and I think Goddard has a big one in this one, and he's definitely a tight end I would start this week. The next one's Noah Fant of the Denver Broncos, so I'm not a big Noah Fant guy in terms of fantasy football this season, and he's been an up and down tight end, no doubt about it this year, but right here, he's got a good matchup versus the Vegas Raiders, and right here, I think Drew Lock is better for Noah Fant than these receivers than what Teddy Bridgewater has been, because these guys haven't done anything, Jerry Jeudy, Sutton, and Fant, for weeks here. But right now, we're locking the lineup. He's more of a traditional throw it to your receivers and tight end type of quarterback instead of Bridgewater, who checks the ball down a lot and really don't throw the deep ball at all here. So Noah Fant, I think this week could have a good game, and it's a good matchup on paper of Vegas that gives up the 4th most fantasy points to tight ends on the season. So the last few games here for Fant, Week 13 at the Chiefs, 4 catches, 33 yards. Week 14 versus Detroit, 4 catches, 51 yards. And Week 15 versus Cincinnati, a decent PPR game, 5 catches, 57 yards. But right here, we're more of a traditional quarterback in the lineup this week. I think Fant could have one of the bigger days for a tight end, and he's a tight end I would start this week. And the 5th and final tight end I would start Dawson Knox of the Buffalo Bills. So Dawson Knox, he's been one of the better tight ends in all of fantasy football this season. One of the bigger pickups as well for fantasy owners this year. Week 13 versus New England for Knox, 2 catches, 14 yards. Week 14 at Tampa, 7 catches, 60 yards, and a touchdown. And Week 15 versus the Panthers, 4 catches, 38 yards. So this week, I know it's a tough matchup on paper versus the New England Patriots in New England in Gillette Stadium that gives up the least amount of fantasy points to tight ends. But right here, the Bills, they got redemption in this game. They want to bounce back after that Week 13 loss. And let's be honest here, this ball game, I doubt it's going to be 50-mile-per-hour winds like it was on that Monday Night Football game earlier in the month here with the Bills and the Patriots. I think Knox has a good game. And like I mentioned as well, he's a main target for this Bill team and Josh Allen. And also Cole Beasley is ruled out already with this game for safety and protocol. So that's a few tight ends I would start here for Week 16 of the fantasy football season.